Welcome back to Kingpilled, folks. I am Matt, and the guy you can't see over there is John Cena. We've got a special guest on the show today. We've also got Glonk Respecter in the chat, and I think that's probably a bigger deal than the special guest on the show. How you
Yeah,
doing, John Cena?
well, I gotta say, Glonk, that is the best username I've ever heard in my life. Nothing will top that ever again. It's beautiful.
Yes.
That's perfect.
Yeah, this our the road to our hearts is very simple, ladies and gentlemen. All you have to do is just have a really good username, and then you'll become our favorite person. uh, I am in the. I thought Matt would bring Vance here. I would absolutely love to have JD Vance on here. If anybody has a connection to JD Vance and wants to invite a sitting U.S. senator and VP candidate to come have a chat on Kingpilled, you tell me what I need to do, and we will make that happen. The whole family is suffering from the AIDS today, and I'm doing my best. We've been working hard to try to keep it from spreading to me. Woke up feeling under the weather today, and just kind of dragging. But I saw this article earlier. A bunch of different people posted it. I'm in a bunch of different group chats, and like half of them all posted this article within the same short period of time. And I started reading it and decided, okay, we need to do a show on this because this is, I think this is strongly indicative of where things are going, and it makes me feel vindicated about a lot of the things that I've been saying. And I will always highlight the things that give me an opportunity to say I was right. So today, then, we are going to read this article. I think I was going to try to pick out a couple of highlights from it, and I was like, this is just. I keep going, I keep scrolling, and this is too much. Like we need to read this whole thing. Before we start reading it, though, I want to give, for those of you who don't know, if you don't actually really know who JD Vance is all that well, just a brief background on him. Do us a favor, like the stream, share the stream if you have anybody else you think would enjoy listening to this, and subscribe to the channel. We're live on Twitter, on YouTube, and on Facebook for the time being. Cooper has Haagen-Dazs. Ooh. As soon as I'm done here, I'm going to be going and eating some Haagen-Dazs. Just recently, I branched out. I was doing the vanilla, I was doing the strawberry, and then occasionally I would do chocolate or coffee. But just recently, I thought I bought a strawberry, and I got home and realized that I had a raspberry dark chocolate or whatever it is. And I took one bite of that raspberry dark chocolate and decided that I was never going back to anything else. So,
Oh, really?
Yes.
The pistachio is pretty good.
It's okay.
Vanilla bean is my favorite. This is just regular vanilla because they didn't have vanilla bean because they're always out because it's the best, obviously. I've not had the raspberry dark chocolate. Not a big chocolate guy, so
I kind of historically haven't been, but I started eating. I don't know what it is, just chomping on those big chunks of chocolate in it. Yeah, that's maybe I'm going through my wine aunt phase now or something, and I need my dose of chocolate at night.
I plan on eating like probably 2 or 3 pints of Haagen-Dazs per day for the next 3 days until Lent starts. So
yeah,
maybe I'll give it a try.
You're bulking again.
For 3 days, I'm bulking.
Yeah, and here at Kingpilled, we actually believe sincerely that ice cream is a superfood, and probably the best commercial ice cream that you can get without getting into some like super niche, crunchy something or other. Just the best commercial thing you can get that's at any store is Haagen-Dazs. So as long as you get the ones that don't have tons of extra additives in them, like the raspberry swirl dark chocolate, that's not as good. But the strawberry, the chocolate, the vanilla, they all have very minimal ingredients. And
we need to get Haagen-Dazs to pay us because, man,
hell yeah,
we could shill Haagen-Dazs. See, look, here's the ingredients. Cream, skim milk, cane sugar, egg yolks, vanilla extract. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, that's... with your grading on the curve of processed food, like that is exceptional. Of course, if you can make your own homemade stuff, that'd be even better. That'd be you could probably eat that every meal and you'd be fine. As it is, I eat at least a half a pint of Haagen-Dazs every day, so I'm going through probably 3 or 4 a week. So that comes out to, I think they're like $4 a piece, so $15 a week in Haagen-Dazs. Haagen-Dazs, if you're out there listening, I will gladly pitch your product for free Haagen-Dazs. That will work for me. Just hit me up. I'll send you the address. 2-Bit Podcast says pistachios are the gayest nut. That's actually, I think he makes a strong case. I remember when I was a little kid, I ate a bunch of pistachios and broke out in hives and everything. But ever since then, I've been able to eat pistachios just fine. So
is pistachio, is that Italian? Is that an Italian word?
Let's find out. Any cunning linguists in the audience here?
Because I'll say that Italian is probably the most pretentious language. Maybe French. Maybe French has them beat, but Italian's the most annoying.
Well, it comes from, the pistachio nut comes from Persia, apparently.
Oh.
Which is interesting. The etymology, from Italian, pistachio. From Latin, pistachium. And ancient Greek, pistachion. So, yeah, of Iranian origin. There you go. There's your cunning linguist update for the day.
Interesting. Oh, by the way, you should check it if you haven't watched it. Watch the stream from last night. That was a banger.
Oh yeah,
I was just sitting here watching, man.
Yeah, that's
I would shut up the whole episode. Basically, that tells you something.
Yeah, and then we sat and talked with Sean for a while longer afterwards, and then you went to bed, and I called him on the phone and talked to him for a while longer, and it's just like. Half the time when I'm out like walking around or shopping or driving or whatever, I'm listening to podcasts. So I'm just sitting here listening to him as if I'm listening to a podcast. And then I remember every so often, this is a phone call. And like when he stops talking, that means I need to say something. And I'm like, words.
Yeah.
Say something smart. All right. So JD Vance, which is interesting. His name is James Donald Bowman. And he changed his name to James David Vance. I'd be interested to know the story behind that. So he came to prominence in 2016 with his book, Hillbilly Elegy, his memoir of growing up as a very poor Appalachian family in Kentucky. And one of the things I wanted to highlight from here was I've read part of the book. I haven't read the whole thing. It's just not the type of book that typically holds my attention. But it says, alongside his personal history, Vance raises questions such as the responsibility of his family and people for their own misfortune. Vance blames hillbilly culture and its supposed encouragement of social rot. Comparatively, he feels that economic insecurity plays a much lesser role. To lend credence to his argument, Vance regularly relies on personal experience. As a grocery store checkout cashier, he watched welfare recipients talk on cell phones, although the working Vance could not afford one. His resentment of those who seemed to profit from poor behavior while he struggled, especially combined with his values of personal responsibility and tough love, is presented as a microcosm of the reason for Appalachia's overall political swing from strong Democratic Party to strong Republican affiliations. Likewise, he recounts stories intended to showcase a lack of work ethic, including the story of a man who quit after expressing dislike over his job's hours and posted to social media about the Obama economy, as well as a coworker with a pregnant girlfriend who would skip work. So that's relevant just because it kind of gives you a bit of a picture of where he's coming from.
It kind of reminds me of, I would like to read that book, but it's reminiscent, or at least where my mind goes, is Life at the Bottom by Theodore Dalrymple, I think. Where that's basically what he is positing, is that I think he was like a psychologist, social worker, something like that over in the UK, dealing with, all the undesirables. And he basically developed a theory that there's kind of this like governing philosophy amongst people at the bottom, and it has actually very little to do with like economics. It's more to do with like perverse senses of status and things of that sort.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
It's kind of making me want to read Hillbilly Elegy and see if I can actually get through it. And that's not commentary on him or the stuff he's talking about. It's just I have limited bandwidth for consuming books and audiobooks and such things. And so there's like specific rabbit holes that my brain goes down, and those are the only things that my brain will tolerate at the time. So he was born in Middletown, Ohio, and he studied political science and philosophy at Ohio State before earning a JD from Yale. So he launched his first political campaign for Ohio's Senate seat in 2021 and won the Republican nomination, defeating Democratic nominee Tim Ryan. So he's Scots-Irish, and his mother and father divorced when he was a toddler. Shortly afterward, he was adopted by his mother's third husband. So these are all as Two Bit Podcasts and Ryan Isaac pointed out in the chat. Vance is very, very vengeful son. He has all the makings for the vengeful son perspective that we've been talking about. JD Vance's life has been like a almost like you could write a movie script for the narrative development of his character in that direction. So Vance and his sister were raised primarily by his grandparents, who they called Mama and Papa. So he later went by the name James Hamill, his stepfather's surname, until adopting his grandparents' surname Vance. Okay, so that's the story behind it. So after he enlisted in the Marine Corps, served in the Iraq War as a public affairs officer, and then attended Ohio State, and then so this is where things really start getting interesting. So after working at a corporate law firm, he moved to San Francisco to work in the tech industry and served as a principal at Peter Thiel's venture capital firm, Mithril Capital. I saw a couple people in some of the comments recently were talking about all the different, what do you call it, Lord of the Rings references with all these different companies. This is a Peter Thiel thing. Palantir, Mithril, Anduril. He's got another one. I can't remember which one it is, but this is definitely a Peter Thiel thing. So it was while he was there that he published his book, and then
I'll just mention that my D&D rogue on Saturday nights has a set of Mithril chainmail that is a medium armor, but does not affect my stealth checks. Based.
Wow. You said D&D and my brain kind of turned off for a minute. So hopefully people in the chat resonate. So then he joined Revolution LLC, an investment firm founded by AOL co-founder Steve Case as an investment partner, where he was tasked with expanding the Rise of the Rest initiative, which focuses on growing investments in underserved regions outside the Silicon Valley and New York City tech bubbles. So you see where this ties back into his upbringing. You could see why he would want to get involved in something like this, and I think it indicates something about his psychology. He has this particular upbringing that is almost a movie itself, and then the initiatives that he pursues, whether it's writing a book or working in an investment firm, like these are the things that he's focused on. These are they reflect back to his childhood. So you can see that there's a depth to this perspective that he has. Then in 2019, he co-founded Narya Capital in Cincinnati with financial backing from Thiel, Eric Schmidt from Google, and Mark Andreessen. And then with Thiel and former Trump advisor Darren Blanton, Vance has invested in the Canadian online video platform Rumble, a right-wing alternative to YouTube. He is also, I happen to know that he was in college, he was friends with Vivek Ramaswamy, and then he, along with Thiel and Bill Ackman, were the primary investors in Vivek's anti-ESG BlackRock competitor, Strive, the asset management fund that he founded in 2022, I believe. So you're seeing all these pieces coming together. JD Vance is a central person in this PayPal mafia, Silicon Valley, techno optimist sort of crew. So he overlaps very much with them, but rather than being like a tech guy who has political interests, he's like a political guy who has tech interests. So he's kind of, if you think of, there's like the full-blown Project 2025 part of this hypothetical coalition, and then there's the full-blown Silicon Valley technocrat part, and then there's the people who kind of exist in the overlap area, and I see him as one of the people that kind of exists in this overlap area. Close relationship with Peter Thiel, and we'll get into that as we begin reading this article posted in Politico. I suppose the technical term is published.
He looks angry.
Yeah, and look at this. Look at the art here. You've got like the gray
Fierce.
behind and then the red, and then he's got Trump as his shadow.
Trump has the muse.
Mm-hmm. So
Trump has the genius. It should be the other way around.
honestly, yeah, I would say so. But this suits the Politico audience.
Yeah.
So the title of the article is there something more radical than MAGA? JD Vance is dreaming it. In a candid series of conversations, Vance revealed an ominous philosophy behind his first year in office. So he's a senator in Ohio. I figured people knew that. I can't remember if it said that earlier. So this is written by Ian Ward, a reporter at Politico. Kingston, New Hampshire. JD Vance arrived at Saddle Up Saloon, a Western-themed bar 30 miles outside Manchester, dressed for the part. Blue jeans, pale blue button-down, and a bright red MAGA hat. As he grabbed the mic and took his place in front of a Trump 2024 backdrop, he slid seamlessly into a stream of classically Trumpian attacks on Joe Biden, on the liberal elites who want to send American jobs to China and American troops to Ukraine, on the radical Democrats who allow inflation to wreck the economy and immigrants to flood the country, on the liberal media who lie about it all. If you listen to the media, they'll tell you the inflation crisis of Joe Biden is over, Vance jawed to the crowd of 36 Trump supporters who sipped beer around tables made of wooden barrels on the Friday before the presidential primary in New Hampshire. But I'll tell you how bad the inflation crisis is. Hunter Biden told everybody he couldn't even afford crack cocaine. It was Vance's first ever appearance for Trump on the trail. The audience roared with approval. A few minutes later, during the question and answer portion of the event, a woman in the crowd shouted, "We've got to find out the truth about January 6th." Vance nodded solemnly. "That's maybe the most important thing that Trump needs to do when he's elected president," he replied. I didn't realize that this was a cardboard cutout the first time I scrolled past this. I was like, why does Trump look so small?
You know what that reminds me of?
What?
That pose right there reminds me of that picture of Perry after he lost all that weight standing in the slides with his suit on.
Yes. Oh, hold on. We got to pull that up.
We got to get Perry on the show. That would be awesome.
Oh, hell yeah. That would... Okay, I need to add that to the list. I don't even know why I didn't think of that before. So here. One of the single best followers in the history of Twitter. Pericles Abassi. At Election Legal on Twitter, engaged to a woman. Nick Adams in USA's Alpha Male of the Week winner. My political analysis and diet discussed on Red Scare. Lana Stan. Oh, one of the best tweets of all time. Unheard it tweeted, "The irony poisoned millennial shit poster has come to symbolize the decaying American empire." And he said, "The only decaying I represent is losing over 100 pounds between 2020 and 2021. This is just... Oh, this is art. This is pure, just postmodern art. It's amazing. Shout out Perry. Back to the article. This was the version of J.D. Vance that most of country has come to know since he was elected to the United States Senate in 2022. Crass, confrontational, and unconditionally committed to defending Donald Trump. That's a great phrase. Crass, confrontational, and unconditionally committed to defending Donald Trump. There's some fantastic alliteration in there. 1 year into his first term representing Ohio, Vance has completed a dramatic evolution from outspoken never-Trumper to unwavering Trump loyalist and dogged defender of the ex-president's most authoritarian assertions. From the lie that the 2020 election was stolen to the legally dubious claim that the president is immune from criminal prosecution. In exchange for his public displays of loyalty, Vance has been warmly embraced at Mar-a-Lago, earning a spot on Trump's shortlist of potential vice presidential running mates for 2024. But Vance's new identity as the MAGA militant has existed alongside, and at times served to obscure, another influential role that Vance has taken on in Washington. In certain conservative circles, Vance has emerged as the standard bearer of the, quote, new right, A loose movement of, now this is a very interesting phrase, a loose movement of young, edgy, and elite conservatives trying to take the ideological revolution that began under Trump, including his overt embrace of nationalism, his hardline stance on immigration, his vocal opposition of U.S. involvement in foreign conflicts like Ukraine, and his overt skepticism towards certain liberal democratic principles, in an even more radical direction. I think it's very interesting that they would use a phrase like young, edgy, and elite conservatives, because the entire premise of the regime press is to deliver the message that there is nothing elite about conservatives. There's nothing elite about conservatism. It's actually it's associated with the dregs of society, the people who are decidedly not elite, the opposite of elite. You're either elite or you're conservative, and there's no in between. Now, and you'll notice I'm kind of doing my voice as I read it to emphasize the corny drama of it, but there's a different tone to this, and you'll pick it up more as we go throughout the rest of the article. Cooper mentioned this unprompted when we started talking about this article. There isn't much pearl clutching. This isn't being delivered in hysterical, screeching derangement. He's clearly, the author is clearly signaling that the friend-enemy distinction here. He's clearly signaling that he doesn't see Vance as a friend, and that he sees him as a threat in some sense. But it's not in the same deranged pearl clutching sense that these articles used to be written. You're not seeing like really strained allusions to brown shirts in the street and the Proud Boys and the alt-right and white nationalism. And this article is signaling something different. I think there maybe could be a debate about what that something different is, but I think it's very clear that this is this has developed over a while. I've noticed this for a while now, probably at least the last year, as it's become more and more clear that a lot of the deep institutional power is making peace with the idea of another 4 years of Trump, and they prefer that to Biden. You're also seeing the press get far less hysterical about them. Not across the board, but a major think piece in Politico about the guy who's one of the strongest rumored vice presidential candidates is actually much more even-handed and even, dare I say, slightly sympathetic. It's interesting. I'll keep reading. Unlike Trump's more conventional Republican followers, Vance's new right cohort see Trump as merely the first step in a broader populist nationalist revolution that is already reshaping the American right. And if they get their way, that will soon reshape America as a whole. Over the course of the past few months, Vance sat down with me for a string of interviews in which he offered a window into this mission, including a rare assessment of his first year in the Senate and of the state of the American right more broadly. Despite his gleefully trollish tendencies online and on the campaign trail, Vance presents in person as something like an intellectual, or at least like a completely unself-conscious nerd. During our conversations, he was soft-spoken and cerebral, more the brooding memoirist of his hillbilly elegy days than the Trumpian firebrand who appears on television. He didn't call anyone a scumbag, which has become his favorite on-air epithet. He rarely mentioned Trump unprompted. So this is some of the thoughts that I have throughout this is, okay, what is it that took him from, where did it say back here? Outspoken never Trumper to unwavering Trump loyalist and dogged defender of the ex-president's most authoritarian assertions.
Yeah.
What caused that transition? Obviously, this is suspicious.
Mm-hmm.
How did he go from like aligned with Bill Kristol to Trump's most dogged defender? One might suspect that he's a plant, that he's there to co-opt Trumpism and pull it back into the orbit of neoconservatism. And I'm sympathetic to that, but I just don't think it really squares well. You'll see more as we go throughout this, but the specific things that he is platforming, that he is championing, and that he's actually making legitimate moves toward, not just rhetorical. Like, for him, rhetoric is the space where he kind of does like the Vivek thing, where he throws out red meat to the crowd, shows them he speaks their language, connects with them. But then when you sit down and listen to them talk long form, there actually is much more of a philosophical bent to them. They see the world in terms of elite theory. They have a deep understanding of political philosophy. They have a very keen understanding of where the United States is right now in world history and what dynamics are at play within the power structures. And these are the sorts of guys who you get someone like Trump and you need him as like your like grenade that you throw in that blows everything up and allows he kind of serves as a black swan event that allows for a reallocation of power. But then the guys who actually hold power, who actually build political coalitions and rule and govern, are the guys who are psychologically postured like these guys.
He was probably, probably got a phone call saying, "Hey, we're on Trump's team now," and that's why he changed.
And I wouldn't be surprised because I mean, this squares with what we've been suspecting. And I mean, obviously, because he's one of the things that's informed what we're suspecting, but this squares that these guys see Trump as, they don't see Trump as an enemy, they see him as an opportunity.
Yeah.
And the opportunity is to restructure the economy, to restructure the polity to suit their ends, to suit their goals, to suit their agendas, which by necessity, the fact that they're going at it this way indicates that they depart from the regime's principles. Because if they didn't, then they would just be doing this through the regime. They're taking an antagonistic posture to the regime, specifically because they want to go in a different direction than the regime does.
Got a super chat.
Super chat from Slowbo Whiteboard, $10. And no matter what fancy populist slogans they preach or deep philosophical landscape they paint with their rhetoric, they do the WEF bidding and kiss the wall after election.
Uh-oh. Time to fight.
Oh yeah, we're gonna fight with our friends. Yeah, I recognize and appreciate that perspective. I just don't agree. I think it's very clear
you have to.
Right.
You have to. If you want to get anywhere, you got to kiss the fucking wall. For right now, that's what you got to do.
Right.
Oh, well.
And
okay.
Yeah. If it was an Orthodox Christian who was going and kissing the wall, then I might have a problem with that more. But I'm not expecting these guys to be, again, I'm not seeing these guys as friends per se. I don't need them to have the same thoughts in their head as I do. I just need them to pursue their interests because my interests align with theirs. Okay, let's continue here. Like most politicians, his professed principles occasionally clashed with the actual substance of his politics. But on the whole, he presented a sweeping and strikingly systematic account of the outlook that has shaped his tenure in office, premised upon a vision of the current moment in American history that is darker and more cataclysmic than anything he has described in public. So again, some of the language here, a sweeping and strikingly systematic account. What's striking about the fact that it's systematic? It would only be systematic if you didn't expect it to be. If you expected that this is just some person worthy of contempt who is not capable of actually having an intelligent motivation. You're looking at these people and saying, "Oh, this is your typical right wing guy who just doesn't understand how the world works, and he doesn't understand all these important things about reality." This language here is saying there's actually some coherence behind this. Again, this is what I mean by it being almost semi-sympathetic. He was candid about his desire to fundamentally transform the Republican Party, and he sketched the outlines of an agenda that would, in effect, amount to a radical restructuring of the American economy, U.S. foreign policy, and even its constitutional order. He spoke about this project not in terms of election cycles, but decades. He's a long-term thinker. It's a long-term project, Vance told me during one of our sit-downs in his Capitol Hill office. The country wasn't screwed in a 10-year period, and it's not going to get unscrewed in a 10-year period. The coverage of Vance's first year in office has largely overlooked his emerging role as the political face of the new right, treating Vance as interchangeable with a handful of other young populist-leaning Republicans like fellow Senators Josh Hawley, Marco Rubio, and Tom Cotton, all of whom, like Vance, have transformed themselves from college-educated elites into self-styled critics of America's ruling class. But Vance's far-reaching vision for the future of the GOP and the political strategy and infrastructure that he has built in Washington around that vision makes him largely unique among congressional Republicans. So Slowboy's comment about the what she's observing here, that they have all these slogans and their philosophies and stuff, and then they just march to the beat of the WEF drum. I think that's much more true of guys like Hawley, Rubio, and Cotton. There's a difference between someone like Vance and someone like Hawley, Rubio, and Cotton. Hawley, Rubio, and Cotton are much more, especially Rubio and Cotton. I think Hawley is probably a little closer to Vance, but these are guys who they do what they're told. Their job is to occupy a particular role and do what they're told. And so they naturally are the ones who, whether consciously or unconsciously, begin being subverted and embodying the WEF vision. Someone like Vance is different, and you could, even his own enemies recognize that he's different. They're picking him out and saying he's different. To Trump's opponents, that makes Vance a singularly threatening embodiment of the dangerous authoritarianism that has taken hold of the American right. Even dangerous authoritarianism is put in quotes.
Isn't that interesting?
It's calling into question the idea that Vance's version of MAGA maybe is not dangerously authoritarian. They're making peace with this idea. To Trump's conservative allies, it makes him an interestingly appealing avatar of a post-Trump GOP and a much whispered about heir to Trump's political movement. I feel like I've got a really good sense of senators, and he's by far the smartest and the deepest of any I've ever met, said Tucker Carlson, who backed Vance's 2022 Senate bid and remains a close political ally. He is absolutely going to be one of the leaders, if not the leader, of our movement, said Kevin Roberts, the president of the Heritage Foundation, the leading conservative think tank in Washington. And I'll add, one of the major forces behind Project 2025. I'm sure he'll run for the presidency one day, said Steve Bannon, another Vance ally. Regardless of whether Vance becomes Trump's eventual running mate for 2024, he is still likely to wield significant influence in a possible second Trump administration, either as a top ally in the Senate or a cabinet-level official. And beyond that, who knows? In a not-so-distant future, the question of whither J.D. Vance could very easily become whither America. That's a hell of a statement.
Yeah, it is.
Equating the future of America with the future of J.D. Vance. Or as Vance said to me, Trump will, at most, serve 4 years in the White House. There's a big question about what comes after him. So I think a lot of... I guess the black pill perspective on this would be, they're getting their tentacles in him now, and they're taking it upon themselves to appoint Trump's successor and ensure that Trump's successor is part of the regime vision. I think the white pill perspective on this is when you actually get into the nitty gritty of what that is, and you compare it to the regime vision as it has existed for the last 70 years or so, then it becomes clear, at least it's become clear to me and to a number of the people who I've been talking with about this, that this signifies a change in the regime. Vance and the people in his orbit are moving themselves to where the regime has no choice but to make peace with them. The regime has no choice but to bring them in. And this, I think, is the necessary... If you're looking at this as an actual statesman, with an eye for the history of the last 300 or 400 years, and you recognize properly that massive civil war, complete and total economic collapse, the destruction of massive amounts of wealth overnight is not a viable solution, then this is the way that you move forward. You figure out, how do we embed our people within the regime? How do we force the regime to make peace with them? You can't force the regime to make peace with you by remaining entrenched in your ideal principles. This is the same thing that happens with libertarians. In order to actually walk in the halls of power and actually influence outcomes, you necessarily have to embed yourself into the regime. which means you have to sell to the regime why it's in their interests to follow the path that you're carving forward. And if you have to do your time in there and you have to kiss some walls, you have to go shake hands and run through the gamut, that's what you have to do. As I've said before, Julius Caesar was not an outsider until he was. If your idea of like the best path forward is to mount an open military coup and try to take over the fucking US government, like the US government is not El Salvador. What works in El Salvador does not work in the US government. There's a tremendous number of complex systems interwoven together that implicate virtually every asset on the planet. This sort of thing does not move quickly. And if you try to make it move quickly, you're much more likely to, I don't know, revert us back to the Stone Age. And I know all of the memes say, oh, well, that would be better because then they wouldn't be trying to trans our kids. Which I get the meme, but as a meme, it's a meme. If you actually are embodying that, like it would be better if we reverted back to the Stone Age catastrophically and violently, then, and that's the only possible option in front of us, then you are explicitly an anti-civilizational force. That's not a force that can build a civilization. That's not a force that can create intergenerational wealth. That's not a force that's trying to build a better world for the progeny. That is an anti-natalist perspective at its core. Okay, now it's going to start getting fun. It's not that they're malevolent, it's that they're stupid. Like a lot of first-term Senate offices, Vance's Capitol Hill outfit runs on a mixture of adrenaline and youthful enthusiasm. This is also interesting. He's a first-term senator. It mentions later, I think he's the second youngest. He's like 39. This is a young guy who's been in the Senate for a single term. Not even. He's in the middle of his first term. Yet he's a mover and shaker on Capitol Hill. It's obvious that he's not standalone. It's obvious that there is influence behind him. But in Vance's case, that heady cocktail is made even more potent by the addition of two other powerful stimulants, testosterone and nicotine. Yeah, now we're talking. Of Vance's senior staff, the vast majority are men under 40. Almost all are 6 feet tall, with the notable exception of his chief of staff, Jacob Reeses, who walks around like Gulliver among the Brobdingnagians. I've never actually said that word out loud before. And a significant percentage of them ingest some form of nicotine on a regular basis. My Senate office probably has the highest ratio of smokers of anybody in the U.S. Senate, Vance, who does not himself smoke, told Business Insider in January. An appetite for nicotine isn't the only thing that unites Vance's staff. The resumes of Vance's senior staffers read like a phone book for the new right ecosystem in Washington. The Claremont Institute, American Compass, the Conservative Partnership Institute, Hillsdale College. His staff is hardwired in all over town, Bannon told me. The youthful belligerence of Vance's office is not a coincidence. Since entering the Senate, Vance, who at 39 years old is the second youngest member of the chamber, has positioned himself as the vanguard of an ideological insurgency within the Republican conference. And like any vanguard, he needs his shock troops. At its most basic, this intra-conservative revolt is unfolding as a generational schism over Trump, with younger Trump-aligned conservatives like Vance squaring off against older Trump-skeptical leaders like Mitch McConnell. But Vance and his allies also view the conflict as a deeper philosophical clash between competing definitions of conservatism. As Vance sees it, the conservatism of McConnell and his allies in Republican leadership represents little more than a watered-down version of liberalism, grounded in free market fundamentalism and foreign policy interventionism. As a result, Vance believes, these conservatives are fundamentally part of what he and other members of the new right call the regime. So here we have the explicit mainstreaming of the regime. This term is going to keep being used throughout the rest of the piece here. The interconnected class of liberal elites who populate the upper echelons of American government, business, media, entertainment, and academia. Vance and his allies, meanwhile, have positioned themselves as non-liberal reactionaries who stand apart from the regime. So this is what we're talking about here, is a political cabal that is speaking and acting like neo-reactionaries. They're using the language of neo-reactionaries. These guys these guys who are positioning themselves to be the future power brokers of the Republican Party are speaking to us. They're using a platform like Politico to speak to us. For what reason? Why are they speaking to us? If the notion here is that this is a World Economic Forum plot, then you have to make the case that the World Economic Forum sees us as the people who need to be contained. They perceive us as a threat. And I don't just mean us as in like white guys. Us as in the people who see the political system the way we do. What would that indicate? If that's the case, let's run down this rabbit hole here. Let's say that they actually do see us as the people who need to be contained through the media. To my knowledge, we're this little niche group of completely ostracized commenters on the internet who have a bunch of podcasts. We talk about stuff. We don't wield power. We don't own institutions. Why are we a threat? Why are we someone who needs to be contained? Unless what we're describing is accurate. This is a reinforcement that the visions of the system, how the system works, is not an illusion. This is exactly how the system works. We're the ones who see it the most clearly, and we're the ones who, in their eyes, can do something about it. This is them advertising their vulnerabilities by trying to cover them up. We're the ones who, apparently, taking this black pill perspective, we're the ones apparently who are equipped to make moves that the regime would see as a threat, that they need to try to preempt. What are those moves? That's a different conversation. We can have that conversation. That's one of the things that we talk about a lot. But even if you want to take the black pill perspective, then the position you're having to argue is we are a legitimate political force. We are a legitimate threat to the political establishment. The political establishment sees us as a threat and is moving to try to mitigate us as a threat. And the thing we should do about that is nothing. I don't see how those things line up. Unless you're just, I don't know, risk averse. You're just more comfortable commenting, but you don't want to do anything beyond that. I can appreciate that. More power to you. Some of us want to do more than just comment. Though they call themselves the new right, they in fact view themselves as the defenders of an older definition of conservatism, as Russ Vogt, the former director of the Office of Management during the Trump administration and a close ally of Vance, told me. This is another key Project 2025 person. This older definition, Vogt said, harkens back to the conservative populism of the interwar period, when the far right of the Republican Party supported high tariffs and strict limits on immigration and opposed American involvement in overseas conflicts, including famously the U.S. entrance into World War II. So the way they're self-defining here is we want a Republican Party that supports high tariffs, strict limits on immigration, and we're opposed to American involvement in overseas conflicts. This is the Republican Party that they want. Are you trying to make the case to me that the World Economic Forum wants a revitalized Republican Party that's focused on high tariffs, strict limits on immigration, and opposition to American involvement in overseas conflicts? Don't you want a Republican Party that does that? I want a Republican Party that does that. I want them to actually do that, but that's what I want the Republican Party to do. People here in D.C. think that this is just Trumpism and that this is the way that Trump has changed the party, said Vogt, whose name has been floated as a potential candidate for chief of staff in a second Trump administration. But, he said, it goes much deeper than that. Vance's mission has been to bring this ideological battle to the Senate floor, and he has done so with some surprising results. In Congress, Vance has predictably allied himself with mostly younger, populist-leaning conservatives, like Hawley, Rubio, Cotton, and Mike Lee in the Senate, and Jim Banks, Chip Roy, and Matt Gaetz in the House. Yet his more unexpected collaborations have been with the Senate's progressive Democrats. In March, after a Norfolk Southern train carrying over 100,000 gallons of hazardous materials derailed in East Palestine, Ohio, Vance joined forces with his fellow Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown to introduce the Rail Safety Act, a proposal to raise safety standards in the rail industry. A few months later, following the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, Vance teamed up with fellow Banking Committee member Senator Elizabeth Warren on a plan to require the federal regulations to claw back executive compensation at large failed banks. Both bills ultimately received markups and passed out of committee. These cross-aisle collaborations aren't especially radical stuff, but they have set Vance apart from the more straightforwardly obstructionist elements of the MAGA coalition, where working with Democrats on anything as humble as naming a bridge is considered tantamount to treason. To a degree, Vance has embraced his reputation as the Senate's MAGA dealmaker, as Semaphore put it last year, but he's also quick to point out that his work with Democrats doesn't reflect any sort of ideological affinity for bipartisanship. Parentheses, Vance often jokes that, quote, bipartisanship in Washington means that, quote, the stupid party and the evil party have gotten together to do something that is both stupid and evil. He cites the Iraq War as a prime example. Where have you heard this? This is a quote. So where have you heard this quote before?
Mm-hmm.
Here's where you heard that quote. Tom Woods, there are only two major parties today, the stupid party and the evil party. Once in a while, the two parties get together to do something that is both stupid and evil, and that's called bipartisanship. So,
Man,
shout out Tom Woods.
I haven't checked in with old Tom Woods in a long time.
I've heard from a couple people recently that he's had some banger episodes out there, and he's had a couple of really good tweets lately, too.
There's some people saying that in the chat here. In fact, I think it was our good buddy, Lontis Rackref, which you'll probably recognize that thumbnail there, Matthew. But he was saying something. Yeah, did anyone listen to Daniel McCarthy and Tom Woods? He alluded to other coalition-building orgs and initiatives aligned with Project 2025. Didn't elaborate though.
Interesting. I can't find the comment. I don't know if I actually got it or if I'm not seeing everything. Yeah, this is a you're seeing the old paleo-conservative influence here and the libertarian influence. So I know for a fact that Joe Lonsdale, who is the co-founder of Palantir and the founder of 8VC, a major venture capital firm, and was one of the founders of the University of Austin, trying to build an alternative to the university system. He was chair of the Seasteading Institute, which is headed up by Patrick Friedman, who is the son of David Friedman.
Yeah.
And he's the one who introduced Patrick Friedman to Peter Thiel. So all of these circles are kind of blurring together here. These are the ideological and motivational impulses behind these kinds of guys. Rather, Vance says, his tendency to cross the aisle reflects his skepticism of corporate interests, which more often aligns him with progressive Democrats than it does with conventionally pro-business Republicans. So he knows who the actual power brokers are here in the political system. Quote, if you look at the people that I've worked with most successfully, it's people who, even though they're from the left, recognize that something's pretty fundamentally broken about American society, Vance told me. Elizabeth Warren, obviously I disagree with her more than I agree with her, but she's at least thinking deeply about what's going on in the country and why things seem to be going off the rails.
That's interesting to me.
I don't like it. It seems to me like the sort of thing, it's just sort of a Like you're doing an interview and someone's like, "Hey, this person you've worked with before, you guys seem like you'd be mortal enemies," and you're like, "Oh yeah, here, let me say something nice about them."
Yeah, right.
Just for the sake of being able to keep on doing things. But like, if you're going to take one of the things that Elizabeth Warren represents is the Occupy Wall Street culture, that coalition, which is the Occupy Wall Street people were kind of like the Tea Party, where the people who actually made up the rank and file are people who sincerely see the regime for what it is by and large and want to do something about it. And they get co-opted and pulled in by the regime, who uses them as useful idiots to actually make everything worse. So being able to actually pull those people together in a populist way, I mean, all the Occupy Wall Street people today are, Tim Pool is a prominent example of one.
Yeah.
And then most of them, the like the lefty ones, would be, they're probably in like alternative health stuff and talking about like pharmaceutical conspiracies, and like that's kind of the angle that a lot of them have gone. But these are still like very motivated voters, very motivated activists, people who really want to get out and do something, and they may not have all the correct prescriptions with what is wrong with stuff, but they very much are opposed to the institutions that are the actual powers that be. So it would make sense to me politically to capitalize on that and build goodwill with those people. At least on some economic issues, he finds himself at loggerheads with Republican leadership. For instance, Vance is quietly critical of Trump's signature legislative achievement, the 2017 tax bill, parts of which he views as regrettable vestiges of McConnell-style conservatism. When I asked him about it, Vance praised parts of the bill, including the elimination of the SALT deduction, which he called, quote, massively redistributive toward the lower and middle income brackets, while criticizing other elements. Quote, do I think there was some more standard GOP tax fare, some of which I liked and some of which I didn't? Yeah, absolutely, he told me. Do I think cutting the top marginal rate is like a high priority for me? No, I don't. And at least for now, the old guard Republicans in the Senate remain strong enough to marginalize Vance and the other conservative insurgents. Vance admitted that he would have voted for Trump's tax bill if he'd been in the Senate, and his two most populist legislative initiatives, the Rail Safety Act and an amended version of the banking regulation bill, have both stalled in the Senate, due in large part to persistent opposition from Republican leadership. But as Trump further consolidates his control over the party and Republicans jockey to replace Mitch McConnell as leader later this year, Vance's faction is poised to broaden the scope of its influence. Senators are anticipating a new leader, and the ideological and philosophical shift is moving, quote, toward Vance's faction, Robert said. If the next president is Trump, you're going to see a much closer working relationship between that faction and the Senate and the White House. Yet for Vance, winning the ideological battle in the Senate is only one step toward victory in his broader political war. Quote, if my project goes well, it will be very hard in 10 years to be a Republican who's not supportive of American manufacturing. Ding, ding, ding. There you go. Reshoring American manufacturing, which is a key plank in the notion of reasserting America's sovereignty over its own borders. Being able to control your own manufacturing and your own industrialization, and not having it all be outsourced to basically strip mine you of your ability to build yourself up within your own borders. This is a key plank toward this reassertion of American sovereignty, which corresponds with the actions at the Fed, who we've come full circle on, the actions of the Fed in doing the same thing financially within the financial system, at the expense of Europe in particular. In the meantime, I asked him, had he learned any broader lessons about working within the regime? The thing that I would like to persuade people most is that too many people think the problem with the country and the world right now is like Klaus Schwab in a private room figuring all this shit out, he said, name-checking the proudly plutocratic patron of the World Economic Forum in Davos. The problem with the elites is not that they're malevolent, it's that they're stupid. I think that recognition that incompetence and stupidity explain a lot more than malevolence is... He trailed off, thinking. Well, I think we'd all actually get a lot more done if we didn't assume our enemies were all powerful.
This is a long fucking article, dude.
Yes, it's great. I love this sort of long-form journalism. We needed to fuck something else up. Vance's dual identities in Washington, the MAGA mudslinger and the new right leader, are reflected in his two key political allies, both of whom dwell far beyond the Beltway. The first can be found 1,000 miles to the south of Capitol Hill, amid the sunny confines of Mar-a-Lago. Vance remains in regular contact with Trump, but his closest ally in that world is the former president's eldest son, Don Jr. This is an interesting thing. I knew that they were friends, but the way this lays it out is very interesting to me. According to an aide who is close to both men, Vance's relationship with Don Jr. dates back to 2016, when Don Jr. read Vance's memoir and, quote, fucking went bananas over it. In the lead up to the 2022 campaign, Vance and Don Jr. developed a close friendship and political alliance, and Don Jr. lobbied his father hard to get him to endorse Vance, in part by persuading him that Vance's previous criticisms, including his speculation that Trump could become America's Hitler, no longer reflected his attitude toward Trump. They're regular texting buddies and they're genuine friends, said the aide. In a written statement, Don Jr. confirmed his relationship with Vance, calling him a close personal friend.
I can't stand when journalists do that. Somebody close to such and such said this. Like, okay. Somebody close to them. Mm-hmm. You just made that up, probably.
Yeah. One of the things that's interesting to me about this is seeing kind of the behind the scenes of the inter-Trump world, where Trump isn't necessarily inclined to endorse him, but then you have Don Jr. going in there, and just I kind of visualize the conversation they're having where Don is trying to pitch him to him, and like what their motivations behind all of this would be and how they're thinking about it. I've heard privately through a few different people who have privately been in Trump's audience and described the way that he relates to people and the his posture, his demeanor, and he's one thing I know for sure is that he's a much deeper and more strategic thinker than people appreciate, and kind of what you see is what you get. Like he's very sincere. In Trump world, the decision to shortlist Vance for vice president is widely seen as a reflection of his closeness to Don Jr., as well as a reward for his public displays of fidelity to Trump, such as his decision last summer to place holds on all of the Biden administration's appointments to the Department of Justice to protest the federal indictments of Trump. Vance has said he would, quote, think seriously about accepting the VP job if Trump offered it to him, but at least for now, he sees his future in the Senate. One interesting thing I'd thought about before was just for aesthetic reasons, imagining Trump appointing Don Jr. as his VP and having the father-son dynamic there, especially with the idea of like, something happens to Trump and now you've got this a hereditary line developing behind him. Just for the memes, that would be really interesting. What this shows is that J.D. Vance would almost be like a Don Jr. proxy, sort of. So it kind of is edging in that direction. I think J.D.'s view is that he can probably be most helpful in helping shepherd Trump's agenda inside the Senate, said the aide. He believes that the thing that probably hurt Trump the most in his first administration was the fact that there were so many Republicans in the Senate who disagreed with him on fundamental issues. Again, just go like the Project 2025 people. What they're saying is the thing that hamstrung Trump before was being surrounded by a bunch of Zionist people who pretended to be sycophants and then just backstabbed him at every turn. These people are identifying exactly what the problem is. There's a familiar face. Vance's other critical political connection and his primary political patron can be found 3,000 miles to the west of Washington in Los Angeles. In recent years, Peter Thiel, whose venture capital firm Vance worked for before running for Senate, has become the chief financier of the New Right ecosystem. And Thiel's idiosyncratic brand of techno-libertarianism, which combines an abiding skepticism of liberal democracy with a belief in national restoration through utopian modes of technological innovation, has become a touchstone of intellectual discussions on the New Right. But Thiel's involvement in Republican politics has become more sporadic. In the 2022 election cycle, he spent over $20 million to support the campaigns of Vance and his other political protege. He spent over $20 million to support the campaigns of Vance. And his other political protege, failed Arizona Senate candidate Blake Masters, only to reverse... Oh my God, this is a very awkwardly framed sentence. In the 2022 election cycle, he spent over $20 million to support the campaigns of Vance and his other political protege, failed Arizona Senate candidate Blake Masters, only to reverse course late last year by publicly committing to not spend any money on the 2024 election cycle. Nevertheless, he remains a close friend and intellectual mentor to Vance. My relationship with Peter is what it has been for close to 15 years, the 15 years that I've known him, which is if there's something interesting going on and I want to bounce ideas off of a very fascinating and knowledgeable person, I'll give him a call, Vance told me. He gave me an example. So Peter Thiel is his advisor, his mentor. He's the guy he's taking advice from. I'm very worried about Israel, very worried about it as a country, because I think what's happened the last couple months has revealed deep fissures in Israel's support around the world. All right, I hear you guys. Hold on. We're going to keep reading. A more short-term worry that I have with Israel is that something analogous to what happened after 9/11 will happen, right? You get all this bullshitting about how the deep state misled Bush about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, or maybe Bush misled himself, or maybe Cheney misled him. There are all these theories you read about why we invaded Iraq. But when you think back on it, the most important reason we invaded Iraq was social psychology. Afghanistan was too easy, September 11 was too bad, and we needed to fuck something else up. There was just like this need to fuck something else up, and Afghanistan didn't satisfy that need. He paused. And I worry about that with Israel. I think the Hamas thing, obviously there are a lot of civilians who have died, but Israel expected to lose more troops going into this. And I think they've had a more successful military operation than they expected to. And I have a big fear for Israel right now. It's about the same exact dynamic, that they're going to need to try to fuck something else up because the psychology impact of October 7 was so powerful. He paused again. Who did I call to bounce that idea off of? Peter Thiel. I'd never even considered this angle, and it's a very clever angle to take. That because you can frame this as Israel sympathetic, that you don't want to see Israel take themselves down the same. I'm very concerned that Israel is going to get balls deep in something else that's going to be really bad for their country in the same way. Look what happened to us when we did that. I'm very concerned that there's going to be more Israeli military interventionism in other places. That's a very interesting angle. He's at the nerve center of this movement. After a year in Washington, Vance is convinced that if conservatives like himself are to complete the takeover of the Republican Party they began under Trump, they need to do what the Koch family and other big-name libertarian donors have done for the past half-century. Build a sprawling system of think tanks, donor networks, educational institutions, professional programs, and media outlets to support their ideological allies in Capitol Hill. And to do that, they need deep-pocketed allies like Thiel. This, I don't necessarily agree with this angle, and I don't know if this is him just speaking the guy's language or the guy interpreting it how he wants to, but this is kind of like a more complex version of we're just going to do liberalism better. We're just going to build our own liberal institutions and do liberalism better. I do think that in order to actually generate a political movement in some sort of direction in the current state of things, you're going to have to do something like that. Like we said before, I think we're going to see the move that we're going to see is more explicit managed democracy, because that's really the only viable course of action right now that isn't like immediately destined to create mass catastrophic collapse. But this is ultimately what's going to breed the ultimate collapse, maybe 50 or so years from now. We get kind of a leveling out, a stabilization. Some guys who are our guys or closer to our guys moving into positions of power. But this isn't going to save the country. This isn't going to save the system. But personally, I don't care about saving the system. I care about using the momentum of the system's collapse to build our own thing. So if we can form a network like this, if we can get ourselves tapped into this sort of network and start directing political capital and economic capital and social capital into our circles, then we can essentially use their momentum to slingshot ourselves out of the crisis. Every imperial collapse brings with it the rise of new interests, new wealth pockets, and new social directions. It's not like when the collapse happens, the collapse doesn't happen to everyone.
Mr. Pete Quinones, says Tom Wood says he got that line from Sam Francis, but I'm sure JD got it from Tom.
Okay, yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised if JD got it from Sam Francis too, or has heard it from Sam Francis. It seems pretty clear that he's been influenced by this same circle of thinkers. He's talking their language and approaching things as if he's been influenced by them. Looking at the comments here. Okay.
Yeah, I've been keeping up with the chat. We're arguing.
Oh,
we
good.
got a live one.
Excellent. I'm going to keep reading. So, like, very clearly, the plan here is we need to build parallel institutions. So this is an actual. All of us have gone through this stage, and I mean, this is essentially a build parallel institutions itself has become a bit of a like. There's a distinction to be made between build parallel institutions to the ones that exist right now, or there's build parallel institutions that are outside of what exists right now. And I think we need some representation of both. And a lot of people that reach the build parallel institutions within the system are not too far away from reaching the position of, all right, fuck the system, we need to build outside it. Now, you can see a lot of these guys taking the same trajectory. In Washington, Vance has already begun to lay the foundations of this alternative conservative establishment. In 2022, while still running for Senate, Vance helped set up the Rockbridge Network, a coalition of wealthy conservative donors who are sympathetic to Trump and the broader nationalist populist agenda. Also in 2022, he served as a founding board member for American Moment, an organization that trains young, populist-minded conservatives to work in junior-level staff positions on Capitol Hill. And if all goes according to plan, in the next Trump administration. This is Project 2025. In Washington, he has been a major supporter of Kevin Roberts' efforts to transform the Heritage Foundation from a bastion of Reagan-era conservatism into the de facto institutional home of Trumpism. And he's a frequent guest at events hosted by the Claremont Institute, a chief academic hub of the Trumpist right. Shout out Michael Anton. He's at the nerve center of this movement, said Bannon, who frequently hosts Vance on his talk show War Room, which remains influential in new right circles. This is him talking to Patrick Deneen. Vance's contributions to the burgeoning conservative counter-establishment have been intellectual as well as institutional. Vance is a recurring guest at the National Conservatism Conference, a buzzy annual gathering that brings Trump-aligned Republicans together with leading new right writers and academics. He has also gone out of his way to inject new right intellectual ideas into the conservative mainstream in Washington. In May of 2023, for instance, Vance spoke on a panel in Washington with the Catholic philosopher Patrick Deneen, whose most recent book called on conservatives to carry out a regime change in the U.S., to replace liberal democracy with an avowedly conservative post-liberal order. At the event, Vance, who converted to Catholicism in 2019, identified himself as a member of the post-liberal right and said that he views his role in Congress as, quote, explicitly anti-regime. That's a fairly strong statement, I'd say. It's also interesting that he converted to Catholicism right around the time he changed his tune on Trump. And I'm inclined to be suspicious of that this is social posturing. Even if it is, though, I mean, hey, whether he's Caesar or whether he's paving the road for Caesar, this is kind of the way that Caesar operates. Caesar is going to become a man of the people, so he's going to be what the people want him to be. And part of this emperor sort of dynamic, the relationship of the king to his people, has to be one of trust. Whether I'm going to LARP as your king or be your king, in either case, the situation's going to be the same for me. So please keep acting like my king. With the flip side of that, the client side of that relationship, it's I'm going to act like your king. I'm going to be your patron in return for your loyalty. This is innately a relationship of trust. So he's LARPing it. Is he sincere or not? Doesn't really matter. In either case, if he's going to begin LARPing it, we need to begin LARPing it as well. And if your fear is that these sorts of institutions are going to be subverted, the natural instinct then would be, hey, there's someone who's speaking my language, who's creating institutions around the values that are like, around my values. He's just going to be subverted by the regime. The natural instinct would be, I need to do my part to ensure this doesn't get subverted. I'm sure all of these different institutions would be happy to have the support among the true believers in weeding out the regime infiltrators. So if you're skeptical about the levels of success that they're going to experience, because I am, I think we're going to get some sort of watered down, sort of lukewarm version of what they're talking about. But the extent to which that differential there between what it could be and what it probably will be will ultimately depend on the extent to which people like us actually begin investing ourselves in ensuring the success of their ventures. Okay. He's the one public intellectual that we have who's in office, and it's incredibly powerful, said Bannon. This movement has needed someone like JD. Vance's most important intellectual contribution has been his effort to stitch together conservatives' critique of elite liberal culture with the populist right's economic critique of the hyper-globalized 21st century economy, a position that Vance often summarizes with the slogan, "The culture war is class warfare." From a liberal frame of reference, Vance's mantra sounds a lot like a sophisticated-sounding justification for, say, sexist shitposts about childless cat ladies on Twitter. So I asked him to provide an example. Oh, he's getting tough now. This isn't a puff piece. He pointed to the trans issue. In the eyes of their critics, Vance said, conservatives appear to be unduly preoccupied with banning a relatively rare medical procedure that parents and doctors should be free to authorize for transgender children under the age of 18. Quote, but if you think about how much money has gone into selling AbbVie's off-label hormonal therapy product, what I see is a combination of children getting preyed on and pharmaceutical companies getting rich, he said. There's a connection between those two things. This connection nominally undergirds Vance's various interventions in the culture war, which include a measure to criminalize gender-affirming care for trans kids, a bill to ban federal mask mandates, a proposal to crack down on affirmative action policies at college and universities, and public support for a 15-week abortion ban with exceptions for rape, incest, and threats to the life of the mother. In each instance, Vance believes, the regime has turned progressive cultural values into a tool to entrench its own economic and political power. Huh! That is exactly correct. Meaning that when Republicans defend conservative cultural values, they are simply defending working class economic interests against the predations of corporate exploitation and government coercion. As society continues to polarize politically along economic and educational lines, he believes, these two objectives will overlap more and more. Yet even if the culture war is class war, and there are good reasons to believe that it is not, Vance's slogan doesn't provide a particularly persuasive explanation of his own approach to a host of culture issues, like declaring English the national language and preempting bans on gas stoves, which have, at best, an extremely tenuous connection to class politics. That is not an extremely tenuous connection. Preempting bans on gas stoves, the electrical agenda, Green New Deal, there you go. Nor does it account for Vance's more transparently liberal interventions in the culture war, like his request this past December that the Department of Justice investigate Washington Post columnist Robert Kagan for writing a column arguing that Democratic states could refuse to recognize the authority of a second Trump administration. I mean, if you, like the complaint about Republican politicians is they don't do anything. They just just preach something, but then they don't actually do anything. They're not actually going after the stuff that matters. Then you get the guys who are actually going after the stuff that matters. And then the complaint is, oh, but they don't mean it. They're not doing it well enough, or oh, they're just co-opted. But they're just pawns of the World Economic Forum. They're pawns of the World Economic Forum while they're actively, like, explicitly, loudly talking about the World Economic Forum, forcing the World Economic Forum into a defensive posture all the time, and like directly going to war with it. If this isn't going to war with the World Economic Forum in the current political system, I would like someone to describe to me what that would actually look like. Because I can't imagine it. Like realistically, not some like stupid have the one guy like sprint across the open plain and throw himself on the castle ramparts approach. But the primary reason to be skeptical of Vance's culture war credo is that his interventions in America's actual class war have been decidedly uneven. Vance has styled himself as a pro-worker conservative, and he points to his work on rail safety and bank regulation, as well as his efforts to tighten immigration restrictions and boost domestic manufacturing, again, American sovereignty, as evidence of his support for America's working class. In October, Vance made a big splash in the national media when he became one of the few Republicans to join striking auto workers from the United Auto Workers on their picket line in Ohio, where he expressed support for their contract negotiations and bashed the Biden administration's electrical vehicle policies, which he says will hasten the offshoring of American auto manufacturing jobs. Friend-enemy distinction right here. He's indicating to these people, to this substantial voter base, this substantial economic base, we are aligned with you. We have the same enemy. And he's indicating to them where that line is. We have an interest in restoring American manufacturing. If we restore American manufacturing, it's going to protect your interests. If we protect your interests, this takes out the regime interests, which are to offshore American manufacturing one way or another, by hook or by crook, and in so doing, compromise our own national sovereignty and our own ability to dictate our economic and political outcomes. Because this is the World Economic Forum vision. It's the distillation of the globalist vision, which itself is like an updated version of the British intelligence goal of maintaining the Atlanticist network so that the United States would be the muscle protecting British trade lines. There's the outsourcing of the defense of the British Empire as Great Britain lost their ability to actually enforce it themselves. They began doing it financially and economically by treating the United States as an ally. This is striking directly at the heart of everything that the World Economic Forum stands for. I'm not that big of a conspiracy theorist. In Washington, though, Vance has consistently opposed the PRO Act, the, quote, holy grail of pro-union labor reform that organized labor and its allies on the Hill have been fighting for over 2 years to get passed. When I asked Vance why he opposes the bill, he pointed to two considerations, one practical and one political. The practical consideration, he told me, is that the PRO Act would effectively codify the U.S.'s current system of collective bargaining, in which contracts are negotiated between workers and their individual employers, whereas he'd like to see the U.S. move toward the sectoral model used in Europe, where contracts are negotiated to cover entire industries. Pro-labor advocates on the left have argued that the PRO Act could serve as a bridge to more sweeping reforms to America's collective bargaining system. But the political case against the PRO Act is just as critical, said Vance. We can't just be good, we have to be smart, he told me. And I think it's dumb to hand over a lot of power to a union leadership that is aggressively anti-Republican. Again, he knows who the friends and enemies are here. The issues don't matter as much as who the issues benefit. Vance's skepticism of the PRO Act is part of a more fundamental skepticism that he harbors toward organized labor. In a speech at a Claremont Institute event in December, Vance said that conservatives, quote, need to be honest about the fact that there are good unions that Republicans should support and bad unions that they should oppose. As an example of the former, so a good union, he cited the Fraternal Order of Police. As an example of the latter, or a bad union, he cited the Starbucks Baristas Union. Quoting, if your politics lead you to defend the Baristas Union as they defend Hamas, then you should have a different politics, he said. It's really that simple. Together with his opposition to the PRO Act, Vance's criticisms of the labor movement have put him in the awkward spot of trying to position himself as pro-worker conservative, while simultaneously seeking to contain the political power of organized labor, the only entities in American society that reflect, however imperfectly, the actual will of workers. Because organized labor, as it's framed here, is really just the will of the labor union bosses who are overwhelmingly Democratic Party supporters. So what he's doing is he's supporting the workers, but he's not supporting the workers' representatives who don't actually support the workers. A generous reading of Vance's position would be that he's trying to navigate the fraught political dynamics of a labor movement whose leaders and rank-and-file members are occasionally at odds on basic questions of ideology and partisan loyalty. A more cynical reading would conclude that a conservative like Vance, who only sides with workers when they side with him, isn't really pro-worker at all. He's just a regular conservative. So again, it's interesting here that we get both readings. We get the generous reading and we get the more cynical reading. Not too long ago, we would have only gotten the cynical reading.
And it's even framed as that.
Right. Yeah. You have to rethink the entire project. During one of our conversations in his Capitol Hill office in early January, I asked Vance what he considered his most significant accomplishment during his first year in office. Maybe the thing that I'm most proud of is that we are on the cusp of radically changing U.S. policy towards Ukraine, he said. It's taken a lot of work. Huh, interesting. I wonder how the World Economic Forum is using J.D. Vance to advance their Ukraine policy. Let's read. Vance entered the Senate last year as one of only a handful of Republicans who openly opposed U.S. financial support for Ukraine. Quoting, "I got to be honest with you, I don't really care what happens to Ukraine one way or another," Vance told Steve Bannon in an interview in early 2022. But since then, over 24 Senate Republicans have come to share his skepticism. The power of this emerging bloc of anti-aid conservatives, anti-aid conservatives, more like anti-AIDS conservatives, was on full display in early February when Vance and his fellow conservatives, with Trump's blessing, killed a bipartisan deal that paired aid for Ukraine with new measures to crack down on immigration at the southern border. Cooperating with the executive. I like this. Although the Senate eventually passed a $60 billion standalone aid package, disregarding Vance's last-ditch effort to persuade Republicans that the bill contains a covert mechanism for Democrats to impeach Trump if he re-enters the White House next year, the bill has stalled in the Republican-led House. And with further aid stuck in legislative limbo, Vance has called on Ukraine to cede some territory to Russia as part of a deal to end the war. I think he deserves quite a bit of credit for shifting conservative opinion on Ukraine, Tucker Carlson told me a few weeks before he traveled to Russia to interview Vladimir Putin. There's only one measure of political power, voters, and what he's doing is demonstrating the capacity of that issue to move voters. Vance's critics sometimes chalk up his stance on Ukraine to rank isolationism or latent Russophilia. But even if Vance does harbor some secret affinity for Putin, those accusations overlook the real radicalness of his position. As Vance explained to me during one of our conversations, he is deeply skeptical of the so-called rules-based international order, the system of laws, norms, and multilateral institutions established in the years following the Second World War. This rules-based international order is the Atlanticist order.
Mm-hmm.
This is the heart of everything. During the post-war era and into the Cold War, Vance told me, quote, "A lot of the mythology around free trade and globalization, the idea that the free movement of labor, goods, and capital would lead to a more peaceful and prosperous world for everyone, was astroturf to justify the political project of bringing communist China into the West's orbit, even as proponents of the new system understood it would come at a cost for the West." So you have the Western intelligence influences that want to maintain the United States posture as the enforcement arm of the British Empire. So they work toward the end of outsourcing all of American manufacturing, and they use China as a place to put it all in return for America footing the bill to cover this entire order. But by outsourcing all of this manufacturing and all of this industrial capacity, America loses the ability to determine its own economic outcomes. You can no longer maintain as a fundamentally import-based economy, you can no longer maintain sovereignty over your own borders. And it was framed as, well, we need to do this because this is what's going to liberalize China. So we need to be good Americans. We need to sacrifice for the sake of China and bring them into the modern age. Where then, instead of having economic sovereignty over a given nation, you have a global intelligence network that maintains economic sovereignty over an entire world, where the manufacturing and industrial capacity comes from one part of the world, and the oh boy, a tower is forming. And then the military enforcement arm of it is maintained elsewhere. The problem is, in order to maintain a system like this, you as a functioning unit, like this intelligence network, the World Economic Forum is a proxy for, you have to develop all these different clients. And then you have to represent those clients' interests to get to maintain them being bought in. As you seek to represent all of their interests, while also going to war with competency, you begin having to borrow on credit to those interests in terms of political capital. You don't have your own political capital. You need other people to give their political capital to you, but you can't necessarily give them something directly in return for it. You have to give them an offer. Put up with this war for a little while, and then you'll get what you want. Put this trade deal in place, and maybe it's going to suck for a short period of time, but eventually we'll change something and make it. We need to do this temporary means of solving the problem so we can get to the permanent solution. But as you begin taking on all these different lines of credit, of political capital, eventually you're going to run into a problem where your clients have an issue with each other. And one or both of them begins to recognize that you're borrowing on credit from them to turn around and use the resources you borrowed against them. So now not only are you buying a weapon from me to beat me with, but you're not even buying it from me. You're taking it from me with an IOU and then beating me with it. I'm losing twice over with this. This is happening at the macro level and at the micro level. The macro level between different nations and ethnicities and other national level political coalitions, and at the micro level with the different political motivations within the U.S. political system. A great example of this is the regime using the shitlib HR lady, 40-year-old wine-aunt who's single energy to go after Elon Musk and take away his compensation package, which pisses off Elon Musk, who wields significant influence over the regime already, manages key regime infrastructure projects, and has a large network of people who are very sympathetic to him, who are also very wealthy, and have a vested interest in ensuring that this doesn't become a pattern where billionaires are politically outspoken and absurd, arbitrary lawfare takes away their compensation packages. The regime's coalition requires buy-in from those people. If they're going to burn them to pursue the DEI, ESG, whatever other agenda, then it's going to be much harder to maintain that coalition. And this is happening across a bunch of different domains all at the same time. This is why a globalist system just cannot be sustained. It requires such massive levels of complexity to actually get to, and the behaviors that breed that complexity lend themselves toward localism. So if you're going to do things competently to build sustainable, strong, grounded, fundamental organizations, they have to be rooted locally, which fights right against this urge to expand them out globally. When you expand them out globally, by definition, you can no longer do things competently. You can no longer maintain extreme competency to manage extreme complexity at that level of scale. So the globalist agenda is doomed to fail. It's not possible to sustain it. The only question is, what is it going to look like when it fails? And are you going to enter and exit that crisis period? Are you going to have a net gain or a net loss over that period? Okay, continuing. This is a quote from Vance. He says, in the 60s and 70s, what Kissinger and these guys would say was, yeah, of course, with globalization, a lot of our people lose jobs. It's going to weaken our social solidarity in all these important ways, but if we make China more like us, it'll be worth it in the long run. In the intervening half century, Vance believes, the rules-based order has delivered on half of that promise, shipping jobs overseas and undermining social stability in the U.S. without delivering on its ultimate promise of transforming China into a liberal democracy. Along the way, it has enriched economic elite who benefit from the globalization and financialization of the international economy, while harming working class people who are rooted in the older industrial economies that globalization destroyed.
Yeah.
This is the exact problem. Like, having Politico publishing this is incredible to me. They are naming the problem for exactly what it is. Thank you, random username. Gifted 1 membership, and Vulpus Persona gets the gift. Welcome to the King Pilled.
All right.
Vulpus Persona is a regular. I see that name in here a lot.
That's a good name. That's a good name. There was another, what was that? Someone just jumped in here and said hello a little while ago. Had a fantastic name. It was like, it's kind of like Timeline Earth, but it was like Toilet Bowl Earth or something like that. It was pretty good.
Oh, Toilet Bowl Earth is I think that's the name. I've seen that. I think he's in Jim Bob's chat often, if that's who I'm thinking of.
Toilet Bowl Earth. Welcome. That's another good name. Not as good as Glonk, but it's it's up there.
Yeah. No one is ever going to top Glonk. I don't think. I think that's one for the Internet Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
If that fundamental goal has not materialized, there's a quoting from Vance. If that fundamental goal has not materialized, and it's clear that Vance thinks it hasn't, then I think you have to rethink the entire project. He's saying rethink the entire project of the rules-based international order. Whether you agree with Vance's diagnosis or not, it serves as the ideological basis for his ongoing opposition to U.S. support for Ukraine. In fact, Vance's opposition goes well beyond Trump's griping about NATO or Republican China hawks' preoccupation with defending Taiwan, even though he has parroted those talking points. When Vance looks at the United States' decision to fund a war for the explicit purpose of defending, quote, the principles at the heart of the international rules-based order, he does not see a noble attempt to defend one nation from the violent incursions of another. He sees a cynical ploy by economic elites to preserve a global order that serves their interests while screwing over the type of people he represents in post-industrial Ohio. What Vance wants to see happen, and believes he can play a role in precipitating, is a fundamental shift away from the rules-based international order and toward a system where individual nations are responsible for their own security and economic well-being. I wonder what kind of system that would be. I wonder if there's a word for that, where individual nations are responsible for their own security and economic well-being. Vance admitted that... Go ahead.
Might have to make up a word. Might have to coin something.
Yeah. Get to work on that, chat. Give us a word to describe a system where individual nations are responsible for their own security and economic well-being.
I was thinking sovereignty. What do you think?
Yeah, that works. The first word that came to mind was an N-word, but the S word is very, very appropriate as well, I think. Shout out again, random username, another 1 membership gifted. Welcome to the King Pilled Magoo. So all of the coolest guys are getting the memberships today.
Yeah, make sure that
to our friends.
King Faggot Fish is not in the chat when you gift memberships. I don't want that guy.
Oh, is that who you guys have been fighting with?
Yeah, he's off his rocker, man. And then I put him in timeout for 10 minutes, and then he jumped over to his alt and started spurging some more.
I'll have to go back through and read the chat afterwards. That's great. He's had some of the most amazing schizo posts I've ever seen. But I don't understand any of them.
Yeah, right. It was getting a little annoying.
All right. Where am I here? Okay. Vance admitted that getting to this point would require a, quote, really drastic change in the way the U.S. economy functions, beginning with erasing America's trade deficits, ding, 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 severely curtailing immigration, ding, 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 and possibly even abandoning the dollar as the global reserve currency, ding, ding, ding. But it would also require an entirely new way of measuring economic strength. If your GDP measurement says that America's economy is 10 times more powerful than Russia's, but Russia has a 20-to-1 cost advantage in some of the most important goods necessary to national security and self-defense, then maybe the measurement is just fake, Vance told me. It's fake and gay. And no, he is quick to argue the reason U.S. weapons manufacturing can't keep pace with Russia isn't because conservatives in Congress won't approve more funding. As I listened to Vance explain his position, it struck me that his basic argument, that economic elites are spending billions of dollars to preserve a global order that does more to protect their stock portfolios than it does to improve the well-being of their fellow citizens, might find broad appeal across the political spectrum. You aren't kidding. In public, though, Vance has stubbornly refused to present that argument in anything but the narrowest partisan frame. It's almost like he understands how the system works. At the Saddle Up Saloon in New Hampshire, for example, Vance bemoaned the fact that if you take your child to an American pharmacy to buy medicine for an ear infection, you have to go to the fourth or fifth available prescription to find a drug that's manufactured in the United States. Even though we invented those pharmaceuticals in the United States of America, we let other countries make the drugs that we put in our children's bodies. And that, he told the audience, is Joe Biden's fault. A few weeks later, during a sit down at an old timey restaurant in Capitol Hill, the best biscuits in D.C., he assured me. Again, this is all this stuff, all these little parenthetical statements and stuff. These are all very humanizing.
I was just about to say, yeah.
I asked Vance if he actually believed what he had said in New Hampshire. If, despite his own understanding of the forces that have led to globalization and the decline of America's industrial base, he sincerely believed that blame ought to be laid squarely at the feet of the Biden administration that has been in office for only 3 years. Which actually, that's a insightful question to ask. Because you could tell by the framing of the question that this guy actually genuinely understands what he's saying.
Yeah, I gotta give him some credit. No doubt he's a regime creature, as you like to say, but it seems pretty fair.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't seem like a lunatic.
Yeah,
he's not a zealot.
Like what journalist said disparagingly, do you know of who would actually ask a nuanced question like, hey, if you're painting this picture of these transnational elites who are orchestrating all of this, then how is it Joe Biden's fault? Like, you're saying the president is not actually the one in charge. So is that he's actually entertaining the question instead of just screeching and pulling his hair out and chimping out.
We haven't chimped out in a while.
That's true. We haven't. I don't think I have the voice for it today.
Okay. Maybe next time. Sorry, guys.
Maybe next time. Do I think that he is a representative of a set of ideas that has caused the problem to happen? And more importantly, do I think he has not significantly changed that during his time in office? Absolutely, Vance replied. But that's not exactly what he had told the voters in New Hampshire, I pointed out. I think it's Joe Biden's fault for not taking affirmative steps to change these things and for sort of doubling down on a generation of failed policy. Is it only Joe Biden's fault? No. Is he a significant fixture of a bipartisan problem? Absolutely. But as an elected official, did he feel any obligation to give the public a complicated and nuanced sense of issues rather than reducing them to their crudest partisan dimensions? I do think that political rhetoric is fundamentally about dealing with people at their particular level, Vance said. What does macroeconomics mean to a person who goes to work and pays taxes and is trying to run a small business? He looked pensive for a moment. I think if you get too deep into the theory, you actually miss a lot of the truth. Having spent several months trying to understand how the man across from me makes sense of the world, it occurred to me that something very similar could be said about J.D. Vance. Your fucking society is collapsing problem. While reporting this story, I noticed that conservatives are prone to some pretty outrageous historical analogizing when you ask them about J.D. Vance's future in the Republican Party. Imagine a regime journalist accusing someone of outrageous historical analogizing. There is no Godwin's Law representative in this article, but that's an exception. Some compared him to legendary politician intellectuals like Daniel Patrick Moynihan, a conservative Democrat who shaped the policy of multiple presidents from both parties. Oh, that's outrageous? To compare him to Daniel Patrick Moynihan? Others pointed to longtime Senate power brokers like Robert Taft, another Ohioan, who, like Vance, became a vocal critic of American intervention abroad. So it's very normal and sober to compare people to Hitler, but it's outrageous historical analogizing when you compare someone to fucking Robert Taft. In a more biblical mood, Bannon even suggests. Now, okay, this is a little over the top. In a more biblical mood, Bannon even suggests that Vance could become the St. Paul to Trump's Jesus, the zealous convert who spreads the gospel of Trumpism further than Trump himself ever could. You know, Jesus played the small rooms until St. Paul came around. He told me it took the zeal of St. Paul to turn Jesus into a headliner. I have always had somewhat of an appreciation for Steve Bannon, but that is probably at its lowest of all time right now.
Yep.
During my final, I do think it's interesting that St. Paul came through in the quote here.
Mm-hmm. What's Bannon's? Is he Catholic?
I don't know. I haven't listened to him enough to know. Let's find out.
I presume he's
'Cause
not Protestant if he's saying St. Paul, unless he's
right.
one of these really obscure, old-timey Protestants.
Let's see. If anyone in the chat happens to know his religious inclinations, then drop it in there. I'm looking at the
Maybe,
what do you call it? Wikipedia.
like maybe Anglican, but he doesn't strike me as an Anglican type of guy.
Yeah, he's always been like I've seen him as a traditionalist
Yeah.
in like the Rene Guénon sense, which is
Daniel
like
Robinson says Bannon is Catholic. I
Bannon
like
is
seeing
Catholic.
that.
Okay.
I like seeing the saint. I like seeing that in a
Uh-huh.
publication. St. Paul. That's right.
Mm-hmm. Lebanese American author Nassim Nicholas Taleb, neo-reactionary blogger Curtis Yarvin, and conservative intellectual Michael Anton have been pointed out as three of the main influences in Steve Bannon's political thinking. He's an admirer of paleoconservative commentator Pat Buchanan. His favorite columnist is Walter Russell Mead. And then it talks about Julius Evola, Nazi-linked Italian writer, yada, yada. Okay, I'm done. All right. During my final sit-down with Vance, I asked him if there were any historical figures he looked to for inspiration. He thought for a moment, then said that he had been thinking a lot about Charles de Gaulle, the leader of the French resistance during World War II, who returned to power in 1958 as the founder and reactionary leader of France's Fifth Republic.
Interesting.
This is also this. It's very interesting to me because obviously he's a very thoughtful, philosophical, well-read, scholarly type, and I've kind of had this this intuition that everyone is kind of waiting for. We have this sort of blood memory thing where we're waiting for World War II to come. And I've been kind of suspecting that if we're doing this historical cycle thing, that we're actually on the way out of World War II. We've already had it. And we're moving in the direction, at least, of a post-war period. Which is interesting then that he identifies himself with a like a wartime and then post-war type guy like this. While most Americans remember de Gaulle for standing against the Nazis, Vance said he was drawn to de Gaulle's post-war legacy. He told me that he admired de Gaulle's efforts to rebuild France's industrial might and preserve its distinctive national interest within the emerging Atlanticist alliance, as well as his efforts to sow the seeds of a vibrant cultural conservatism that could transform France's experience during the Second World War into a source of national pride rather than national shame. So he's taking inspiration from a guy who saw himself as someone who was rebuilding a company, Freudian slip, rebuilding a country's industrial power and restoring national sovereignty and trying to generate national pride after having been subjected to a wartime experience. That's sort of how he sees his role. I think that's very telling. It wasn't like moral majority petulant finger wagging, Vance told me of de Gaulle's conservatism. It was more like an invigorated self-confidence. I mentioned that de Gaulle, who returned to power following a right-wing coup stemming from the Algerian War of Independence and then proceeded to rewrite the French Constitution to dramatically expand the executive power of the president, also saw his job as reversing France's imperial decline. I don't think he was 100% successful, Vance said. He solved a lot of problems and made a lot of problems less bad, but he didn't fundamentally address the decline of France. I wonder what the decline of France was. It was, he acknowledged, an imperfect analogy, but it got at something critical about Vance's political outlook. Like de Gaulle, Vance thinks of his task as managing an empire in decline. He has said that the United States has entered, quote, a late Republican period, analogizing America's current political trajectory to the decline of the Roman Republic in the 1st century BC. He's basically an online right-wing Twitter poster who's like, everyone's always debating, is it the collapse of the Republic or the collapse of the empire? And he has an opinion on it. I wonder how often he thinks about the Roman Empire every day.
Probably more than your average Spurg.
I would say so, yeah. But that comparison doesn't entirely capture the direness of Vance's understanding of the current moment in American history. In Washington, Vance told me, quote, very serious people regularly approach him concerning America's aging population and its impact on the federal government's ability to pay for Social Security. My response to that is that's a financial consequence of a much deeper problem, Vance said. In the not-so-distant future, he said, America is poised to become, quote, a society that is upside down demographically, where more and more retirees are supported by fewer and fewer young people, where we don't have children laughing in the streets because we've gone the way of South Korea and there aren't enough kids to even populate our schools. A grave look entered his eyes. That is not a we can't afford Social Security problem. That's a your fucking society is collapsing problem. Whatever else Vance might believe, this is the ominous core of his worldview. After decades of decline, America is teetering on the brink of complete civilizational collapse. Vance pushed back against my suggestion that his vision reflected a fundamental pessimism about America. Quoting, I think decline often precedes periods of renewal, he told me. But he did suggest that America's political class has proved either unwilling or unable to grapple with, quote, the fundamental stagnation at the heart of American society. There's just this desperate effort to just argue that everything's gone well. And man, I just don't buy it at all, Vance told me. Life expectancy is going down, and we're talking about slashing retiree benefits for our elderly, and you can't get amoxicillin for your kid's ear infection. It all just seems incredibly fake. There's a lot to quibble with about Vance's response to the situation he described. For one thing, Vance seems blithely indifferent about other, perhaps more pressing antecedents of civilizational collapse, like climate change. Maybe life expectancy and taking care of the elderly and keeping your kids alive, maybe those things are a little bit more important than the climate.
Yeah, because I mean, like, if an asteroid fucking smacks into Michigan and we all die, you know, all those other problems don't matter.
Yeah.
So deal with what you can, I guess.
And he has accused Democrats of bringing a large number of new voters into the country to replace the voters that are already here, rather than embracing immigration as a possible solution to America's rapidly aging population. You could so clearly see the dichotomy between the liberal and the post-liberal here, where he's like, well, so he's the author here is granting the problem that there's a rapidly aging population problem, and he says, well, why don't we just do that by bringing in infinity third worlders, and then have them all have babies, and that solves the problem because human beings are just like interchangeable widgets.
Right.
But Vance is seemingly, what's that?
Like, yeah, you might be able to solve the population problem there, but you're gonna, you're gonna have like another problem, namely a third world problem where that's America now.
Daniel Robinson says Rousseauian figism.
Because the third worlders, they bring the third world with them.
Right. Yeah, we're trying to maintain our distance from the third world, not import it. 2-Bit Podcast says if we fix the weather, the planes will stop blowing up. But Vance's seemingly genuine belief in the catastrophic trajectory of American decline provides the critical context for understanding his broader political project. During one of our conversations, for instance, I asked him what exactly he had meant in New Hampshire when he said that Trump needed to uncover the truth about January 6th. Look, he said, sounding a little peeved that he was being forced to talk about this again. To get all the throat clearing out of the way, do I think that January 6th was good? No. Do I think that people who violently beat up cops should go to prison? Absolutely. He shifted into a more earnest register. But there was this really weird attempt to spin a narrative around January 6th that I just don't buy. Do I think it was actually an effort to overthrow the government? No. But the guy who was going around planting pipe bombs, we were totally uninterested in that guy. How is our media and our security services able to spin a narrative that MAGA grandmas are participating in an insurrection, but meanwhile we're not interested in the guy who's planting pipe bombs? Vance isn't correct that the security state doesn't want to find the January 6th bomber. The FBI is currently offering a $500,000 reward for information related to the incident. And he is stretching his poetic license when he describes the January 6th rioters as MAGA grandmas. We got to get the tut-tuts in here.
That $500,000 reward is just that dude's salary because he worked for them.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And it's like, we need to find this guy. All right. Put out a reward, 500 grand. It's like this guy was trying to plant pipe bombs to disrupt election proceedings by blowing up a bunch of congressmen. 500 grand. All right. Call us if you see him.
Yeah, for real. They can go track down some Twitter dude who happened to be there when everything popped off and then just ruin his life. But they can't find this guy who was planting bombs.
Right.
Come on.
But these distortions of January 6 mirror Vance's broader view of the country. As he sees it, the United States is on the verge of going up in smoke, yet its leaders seem indifferent to this fact at best, or at worst, cynically invested in covering it up. Again, we're getting this nuance here, where we're getting both perspectives. Normally, if the regime is just covering its own ass, then it says it does its whole. It would just lean in on this side. Yet its leaders seem indifferent to this fact. Oh, all the politicians, they're just indifferent. But here we even get it even goes further. They're actually cynically invested in covering it up. This same apocalyptic vision also underlies his enduring support for Trump. Vance does not believe that 4 more years of Trump will be enough time to realize his vision of America, but he believes that electing Trump represents the only hope that Americans have for getting off the path to literal civilization collapse. And he is prepared to go to extreme and possibly unconstitutional lengths to ensure that outcome. When asked by George Stephanopoulos in early February what he would have done if he had been vice president on January 6th, Vance said in no uncertain terms that he would have done what Trump had asked and demanded that contested states submit alternative slates of electors to the House of Representatives. This wasn't just cynical posturing for the VEEPSTAKES. It was an earnest and deeply unsettling expression of his view that America might not survive another 4 years of rule by the regime.
These Greek names are so goofy.
I'll say something to you later. I want to talk about it publicly, related to Greek names.
Okay.
On several other occasions, most recently during his interview with Stephanopoulos, Stephanopoulos just makes you think of Snuffleupagus.
Yeah, right.
Vance has suggested that a second-term President Trump could summarily fire a significant number of mid-level federal bureaucrats, and if the Supreme Court intervenes to stop him, he should openly defy its order. I asked him if this was an accurate description of his views. Yep, he said. I asked him to explain. For me, this is not a limited government thing. This is a democracy thing. Like, you need the bureaucracy to be responsive to the elected branches of government, he said. The counter-argument is, aren't you promoting a constitutional crisis? And my response is, no, I'm recognizing a constitutional crisis. If the elected president says, I get to control the staff of my own government, and the Supreme Court steps in and says, you're not allowed to do that, that is the constitutional crisis. It's not whatever Trump or whoever else does in response. When the Supreme Court tells the president he can't control the government anymore, we need to be honest about what's actually going on. There is a lot that the country still doesn't know about J.D. Vance, but as I walked away from our final conversation, I realized that Vance had just told me what kind of leader he aspires to be. Charles de Gaulle was prepared to transform his country's entire constitutional system to preserve what he believed to be the essence of his beloved nation. So is J.D. Vance. That's one of the more interesting political pieces that I've read in a while.
Yeah.
For a whole bunch of different reasons. But I'll be very curious to see if this becomes a thing. People talking about de Gaulle. In a lot of ways, just looking at this, temporally, de Gaulle comes after World War II. De Gaulle comes after the Nazis. De Gaulle is part of rebuilding from the Nazis. And now, what this is, the implication of this piece is we're beyond the Nazi problem, and now we need to build. And the way we need to build is through treating the United States like a sovereign power and sorting out these issues. That's the message that is J.D. Vance's message that's being delivered, I think, very clearly through this piece. I mean, what do you think? Do you think that there's the token tut-tutting and we have to present the other side of the story and everything, but did it seem to you like this pretty much honestly portrayed the way J.D. Vance sees the world?
Yeah, I suppose so. What I find more interesting is, okay, so this journalist who is the enemy, they are part of the enemy class.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're having multiple meetings with J.D. Vance, presumably they would do what every journalist does, and they would just, quote mine and do a hit piece and blah, 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 blah. I think the fact that this article is not what you would expect it to be um, paints an interesting picture about the force of character that JD Vance is.
That's a really good point.
Do you understand what I'm getting at?
Right. In other words, like he has such a force of character that this journalist, who I would imagine the journalist probably is already, I think that he writes a piece this fairly grading on professional journalist standards, indicates some level of character for the journalist himself. I think he was sincerely trying to portray, he was trying to do an honest piece of journalism. But and beyond that, JD Vance has such gravity to his personality that he's able to communicate himself really well and
win some sympathy.
And yeah, and make the guy feel like I want to portray this guy honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah. JG says good vid on De Gaulle on Apostolic Majesty's channel. I'm going to go watch that after this. I want to see if I can find a picture of this Ian Ward guy to try to get a, let's see, Ian Ward reporter.
Physiognomy check.
Yeah, I got to do a physiognomy check. Huh. Okay. Here.
Okay.
He's kind
Seems
of
a little pencil necked, but
yeah, but he seems to have a, I don't know. There's kind of like an honesty to his face. He seems very non-threatening.
Yeah, he should start like chewing nicotine gum and drinking black coffee.
Yeah, mastic gum. Build out that jaw.
Yeah,
he's a little weak jawed.
Yeah, and he needs to like smoke cigarettes or something, so he needs to like rough up his face a little, get some like stress lines,
Yeah, go like bang his head on a brick wall a few times and get some scars.
Yeah, drink some whiskey.
Daniel Robinson says Trump needs a millennial to be his VP, not many to choose from. Vance is one of the few. Yeah, like I think to me a Vance VP would be even more encouraging to me than a Vivek VP. And I'm really doubting that Vivek is going to be the VP. I don't think that's going to happen. I think he's going to be part of the cabinet. I think he's going to have some significant role, but I would see him more as maybe like Treasury Secretary. That seems kind of like the type of position that you would put someone like him, I think. And then just he'd be like a close advisor. Vance is the type of guy that I think has the force of personality, poor kid from Iowa or from Ohio rather, who makes it big, and like having him tabbed as the future replacement for Trump, I think that story fits together more compellingly for me than the Vivek one does. And then just some of the stuff that Vivek has said and some of the stuff I've heard privately and everything has just made me think that Vivek isn't going to be it. Now, on the flip side, the big rumor right now is Kristi Noem, which would be just the biggest black pill in the world.
Unless he was just kind of like I don't know. That would be kind of a bummer. But I mean, she could also just kind of be put in like another room, just kind of like Kamala. Like I haven't heard from that bitch in years. Like,
and I suppose that would be the
like yep, you're VP. Okay, cool.
Right.
Anyway,
now just go look pretty for us. Thank you. That would be, I guess that would be the potential positive angle to this. I mean, all this, we're just kind of trying to read tea leaves, and each thing that happens, we don't have any control over whether or not it happens. So when it does happen, then we can evaluate it. Okay, is there a cause for optimism here? What would that cause for optimism be? What would it look like? And so in the case of, to me, just generally speaking, any woman VP would be this is not a woman's job. The role is not for a woman. However, if what your goal was to have an empty suit that is eye candy, then having someone like Kristi Noem would suit for that, would work for that. Just like you said, a Republican Kamala Harris, you just put her off there and she goes and like gives speeches and tweets and takes on initiatives like school lunches and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Basically just kind of serves as sort of like a second first lady.
Yep.
And then you have if she gets if something happens to Trump and she's the president, then it just becomes even more explicit. Like other people are running the administration and she's just kissing babies and waving to crowds. That would be the optimistic.
Is basically what Trump is going to be doing anyway.
Right. So I think if it was any like I don't know, Elise Stefanik or the chick, one of the rumors is the chick that gave the response to the State of the Union, which was impossible to watch. You wouldn't be able to make it through it.
Okay. Okay, that's good to know. I won't watch it.
It's very obvious why she is where she is. Like she's just there for people to look at, and pretty white lady. Which I recognize the utility of that.
1 to 10. How would you rate
her? 6 maybe, something like that. She's the type that some people would probably be really into. I'm not so much, but I see why people think she's pretty. But any woman who winds up in that role, I think that would be the optimistic take, is that's the reason why they're being selected for that role.
Kyle says she was super breathy. It made me uncomfortable.
Okay, you know what? We're gonna make you watch it.
Oh boy, here we go.
I think her name is Katie Britt. State of the Union. Yeah. We're not gonna watch the whole thing, but you get at least some of this. I have to do this just because I like to watch you squirm.
Yeah. She's pretty.
Good evening, America. My name is Katie Britt, and I have the honor of serving the people of the great state of Alabama. And
I'm gonna have to pull my fucking earphones out.
However, that's not the job that matters most. I am a proud wife and mom of 2
Oh my god, stop!
My daughter Bennett and my son Ridgway are why I ran for the Senate. I'm worried about their future and the future of children in every corner of our nation.
Okay, I can't take anymore.
Yeah. Kyle says this is a twisted ASMR video. Like for real, this is like torture.
Oh, this is the voice of the Longhouse incarnate. Yes, that's exactly what that is. That's so. This woman is clearly like an inch deep. Like there's not. she is a body to be inhabited.
She's a mother, and she cares about the children.
She cares
all across our
so
nation.
much.
So much.
So much.
I really care about the children. I really like the children.
Give me your children.
I'm hot for children. And then she like turns into a hag.
Yeah. 2-Bit Podcast says she stares into your soul while giving you a handy. She's like asking you for status updates. Like, is it good? Do you like it? Am I just the best?
I'm so uncomfortable.
Kyle says, see, now I'm horny.
Very toothy.
Oh, she's still looking at me. Go away. It's creepy.
She gets her lips all dry, like from all that breathing, her lips get all dry, and she like tucks her lips in behind her teeth. You know how you can get your lips to stick to your teeth when they're dry. And she smiles at you with that big smile.
So yeah, so I think
Sorry for the porn, guys.
yeah, no porn allowed. Come on, Cooper. You led me astray. The one woman that I think would be very interesting, and bear with me on this. This is not my idea, but listening to Tom Luongo, I think he actually made a pretty interesting case. Tulsi Gabbard, because she has a couple of the points he made me kind of rethink her. Because my first instinct was I was like one of the other, like
Hawaii?
she's the prettier version of this chick.
She says Hawaii, and that's unforgivable for me.
However, a couple of things he pointed out was, number one, she is one of the few people in Washington who has gone toe to toe with Hillary Clinton and called her out to her face, and it showed some balls. And she did the same thing with Kamala Harris too. So there's depth of character there to her, and that's further indicated by the fact it would have been very easy over the past few years. Like, she left elected office and would have been a shoo-in if she ran as a Republican in like a purple district somewhere. She could just move to somewhere in some like Arizona or something like that and run as a Republican and win easily. If her idea was she basically just wanted to kind of insinuate herself into the political system and get checks and give speeches and whatever. But she hasn't done that. Now, she's obviously very she's angling hard for the Second Amendment folks lately, if you've seen her on social media. Which she makes a pretty good case if that's what you're judging on. I heard an interview with her just recently, and the person asked, like, would you be, supposedly you've been rumored as a Trump VP, and how would you respond to that? And she answered, and I was reminded why I don't like listening to her, because everything she says sounds like a rehearsed speech. Even when she's like, this is when she was on Joe Rogan a while back, and they were just like shooting the shit and talking about stuff. Like, she doesn't like just like relax and engage with you. She has a character that she plays. She has a performance that she puts on. And I've encountered this with people with podcasting and everything. Everyone kind of has their own character they go into, and some of that I think is just a subconscious thing. But it doesn't help me with the sense of seeing her as for sale politically. Maybe that's a good thing. I don't know.
Can you imagine like going to dinner with Donald Trump? How much fun that would be.
Mm-hmm. I've heard stories that it's a good time. Josh Ham says he intensely dislikes Tulsi. That's interesting. Why is that? Daniel Robinson. I haven't really thought about her much until I heard the rumors of her being suggested as a VP candidate. Daniel Robinson said Trump won't pick Tulsi because she steals the limelight from him. Someone like Stefanik won't do that, or even Huckabee Sanders. Yeah, I really, really have a hard time believing he would pick Sarah Huckabee Sanders, because she seems like a nice person, so I don't want to say something like I'm talking
nice
publicly.
Girl.
She's real nice. She seems like a sweet girl. We'll say that. But yeah, like I think this is the potential upside of some of these
personality.
The potential upside of some of these women is that they can function as this like second first lady role, essentially. That is actually kind of could be kind of an insurance policy to some degree, where you don't really have to worry about them going completely off the reservation. You just give them the things that would make a woman happy and let her go do woman things.
While the men do the real work.
Right. I think Tim Scott would be a male version of that. He is like I don't know, like a golden retriever. And
yeah.
You wouldn't really want a golden retriever like as a sled dog, because squirrel, it just like it's hard to stay on the straight path with someone like that. But at the same time, golden retrievers are preposterously loyal and will like literally jump into a wood chipper for you. So I don't know. Maybe that's what and then Trump as the boomer is like, oh, I get the black guy, you know, all the blacks. Because there's nothing that the blacks love more than Tim Scott. That's the meanest thing I've ever heard anyone say about golden retrievers. Ashton Duke said Trump will pick the VP who will pick up the most votes. It's interesting. Every time he's been asked about this, he says he doesn't. His opinion is that the VP doesn't really matter electorally and hasn't traditionally, which is not something that Trump would just say. Clearly, someone has come to him and presented evidence to him that says you don't need to worry about the electoral implications of the VP. Which, if I can read into this, tells me that the VP being put forth to him is someone you would think would hurt him electorally, or at least would not be a benefit to him electorally. And he's made peace with that. That's kind of reading between the lines. I don't know any other reason why Trump would say something like that. And he said it very much in the way that Trump, like, you know how when you listen to Trump, you can hear when he's just repeating like secondhand what someone else had told him in a meeting. That's how that sounds to me. Josh Ham says Trump will pick the VP he's told to pick. The question is, which group gains enough hold over Trump to enforce their candidate? AIPAC versus New Right. I agree. If it's AIPAC, it's Haley. Yeah, it's definitely not going to be Nikki Haley. That I think that ship has sailed. I do think Stefanik is probably pretty likely. And
I don't know who these people are. Who's Stefanik?
Elise Stefanik is I think she's a congresswoman from New York, and she's very much one of the like, she just parrots MAGA stuff. But I think she's actually, I've gotten the sense from her before. I don't know any of her like legislative projects she's taken on, but the vibe I've always gotten from her is that she has a little bit of like Marjorie Taylor Greene to her, kind of. Where
kind of crazy
and like actually seems like she might be a bulldog going after stuff. All right, well, we're over 2 hours here. I think I've said everything I planned on saying. You have anything else, Cooper?
No, I'm good.
All right. Well, Buck says she started off working for Bill Kristol. Who did? Stefanik? Daniel Robinson said, I don't think Stefanik is as retarded as Marjorie Taylor Greene. Yeah, I don't think so either. But she gives me kind of some of those, I don't know, like bombastic girl boss kind of vibes, but she hasn't turned herself into a complete cartoon. Oh, interesting. So Lee Stefanik came up through Bill Kristol. So yeah, that would be, so assuming that she's following in the footsteps of her mentor ostensibly, then that would be it would be interesting to know that then is she following in the footsteps of her mentor, or is she going in opposition to her mentor? But in either case, if she's been trained by the neocons, then she actually is someone who could get stuff done, and that would not be a good thing. Which makes me wonder then if my theory all along has been that the pick is being held up because, as Josh said, his VP is going to be decided for him, and there are factions warring over who that VP is going to be. And perhaps the neocon pick, the put Trump on a leash VP pick, would be Stefanik. I mean, either way, Trump's going to be on a leash, but depends on who's holding that leash. All right. Thank you for tuning in, guys. Hopefully this was entertaining and informative and white pilling to some degree. We like dispensing white pills here because we think hope and optimism is important.
Patriots in control. Trust the plan.
That's right.
Like the stream.
Literally do nothing. Just sit and post on the internet. That's our call to action. And if you want to post on the internet in a private forum with the rest of us, then you can join the King Pill Discord server. Go to linktree.com/kingpilled, and you can sign up there. and it has been I can never keep up with it now. There's literally always unread messages. Hasn't been that way before. Now it is. And yeah, Buck, I'm going to text you as soon as I'm done here. I've got a thing to talk to you about. All right. I'll talk to you later, guys.